There you go.
Oh, yeah.
Well, good evening and welcome to About the Valley. My guest this night is a former Rockdalian,
A former.
yep, and that's Harry Whitin.
Thanks for
And
having me, Harry.
a familiar name within this community, very familiar name. And here's where he was associated with the most, the Rockdale Mill.
Yeah, my great-grandfather, grandfather, father all ran the Rockdale Mills.
Yes, yes, and it was put out a lot of material back in their day.
It was the only Whitin soft goods company that survived beyond really the 1920s.
Yes,
And they were, at their peak, they were up to about almost 2,000 employees, and
that's
Rockdale was thriving.
unbelievable.
They produced a lot of fabric.
Yeah, yes. In fact, we were talking just a little while ago. Rayon was one of their fabrics in the end, which was really needed in World War II for the parachutes.
The Paul Whitin Manufacturing Company, which is the name of the Rockdale operation, the Paul Whitin Manufacturing Company got into synthetic fabrics, threads, and fabrics at a time when the whole world was cotton.
Yes.
And that would be right after the turn of the century. And one of the reasons that the Rockdale Mill lasted through the middle of the last century was because of the synthetic fabrics, rayon, nylon, Orlon, Dacron, all of those rons. And it was the ability of the Whitin Machine Works, which was run by George Marston Whitin, and the Paul Whitin Manufacturing Company, which was run by Harry Whitin, to get into all of these new technologies.
Yes, you had a good collaborative workout.
Terrific, yeah.
Yes. Yeah, they would make the machinery and then you would install it in here in Rockdale.
And they would develop the machinery just as Paul Whitin Manufacturing was developing the threads, the basic elements, and they learned together. And so
Yes.
they really developed it together, which was a key to the success of both companies as long as they both did live.
Of course, one of the biggest problems you had, which we still have, is the mill would flood. You know,
It sure would.
and you had to build it where it was because at the time they needed the water power to run the mill.
Absolutely, and it still floods today.
Yes. But, you know, and like all other industries though, the industry moves on. And the textile industry started moving south. A lot of it because now we didn't have to ship the cotton up north. We had the mill right there, and you went down to the Carolinas, and that was a lot of textile mills disappeared, and this valley was lined with them.
It was, and the real demise of that textile business was really around 1910, 1920.
Yes.
Because by that time, it made no sense to ship the raw material all the way to the north
Right.
because there were other ways to power mills. So people were able
Right.
to build mills down south where they previously couldn't because there wasn't the water power. There wasn't
Right.
the...
Yeah. Now electricity came in. We don't need the water power any longer.
Yep.
And so why ship it up?
And then there's labor.
Yeah. Labor was a lot cheaper in the south.
And the South learned a big lesson when labor got so cheap in other countries, and suddenly the mills in the South were
Yes.
moving elsewhere.
Moving out of the country, which is happening right now. Very little textile manufacturing in this country.
But what's interesting to me from a family standpoint is there's still Whitin machines
All over the world.
all over the world, running
Yes.
all over the world. I mean, there's one little mill up in Unity, Maine that runs exclusively Whitin stuff, a little woolen mill. But, you know, you can go to Asia, you can go to the Middle East, you can go to South America, and there are Whitin machines still working.
Yes. Yes, and it's amazing. These two machines are old,
They're very old.
but they're still going strong.
I guess they built them to
They
last.
built them well.
They did.
And of course, yeah, during the war years, they were able to convert over to war material.
Right.
They make the White Machine Works was making the engines for the boats.
Yeah, and they were also making these magnetos for
The magnetos, yes.
but they were, and the government asked them to do that, and the government asked the Rockdale mills to start producing parachute fabric.
Right, which was important, and there wasn't a lot of places where you could get it.
Right. Right. So
So you really
the history of that area is really remarkable.
I mean, you talk to anyone any of the older people in Rockdale, they all worked there.
I think we all qualify.
Yeah. I mean, I remember everybody that I knew, all the older people I knew, all worked at the Rockdale Mill.
Hmm.
It was standard. My father met my mother at the Rockdale Mill. That's where everybody met when all my father's family worked there, my mother's family.
I think that was one of the hallmarks of the Whitin companies, was that they were so family centric. I mean, the
Yes.
generations worked there. People met there. People.
Yeah, and I know one person. My father-in-law worked there up until it closed, and he told me about a gentleman who had lost a couple of fingers working there.
Hmm.
Well, he was promised a job for the rest of his life. Unfortunately, the mill closed.
But then
But that's the way they were, though.
that is.
They would give him something to do. He couldn't operate that machine any longer, but they gave him something else.
Hmm.
He didn't lose his job.
That was that repeated itself right up to the very end, because the Paul Whitin Manufacturing Company, which was the Rockdale operation, moved to Hardwick, Massachusetts.
Yes.
When the mill closed here, and they still had the same thing. I can
The
remember
village of Gilbertville.
in Gilbertville. I can remember as a teenager working vacations, putting spinning frames together, and there were all these people who felt that they had a lifetime commitment.
Yeah, I told you on the phone that my brother, actually, an older brother, worked at the Gilbertville Mill,
Oh, really?
and they would go. There was 4 of them that would go in the same car every day. They worked
Yep.
the second shift,
Okay.
and he did that for a few years.
Yeah, they stayed in business till about 1969, 70, right around there.
Oh, okay, yeah.
And they closed, of course, here in Rockdale in the mid-50s.
Yeah, I think 54, I believe.
I think so.
And then we had the flood in 55. And I remember as a kid going down along the floodplain after the water receded. You could find the cones, the cardboard cones that you spun
Yeah.
they were everywhere because they got washed out from the mill.
Ah, interesting. I remember one of the floods very well, because the flood that took out the Sutton Street Bridge right
Yes.
there, my dad was in the mill. We lived a couple houses up on Sutton Street on the other side of the river, and he was stuck on the wrong side of the river. It took him about a day to get back between the flooding in the mill and the need to drive all the way around to
Yeah,
get
eventually
back.
they put a Bailey Bridge. The
They did.
National Guard had put a
Yep.
Bailey Bridge in. and you go through the parking lot and then up the other side.
Right, and rattle, rattle, rattle. It was noisy
Yes.
when you drove across it.
Yes, and that bridge that washed out was actually a grid, was an orange grid bridge. Open to the, you could see the river.
Oh, okay.
I
Yeah.
remember it quite, I was old enough to remember that.
What was the name of the little lunchroom just
Red Soda Shop?
Red Soda Shop.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah.
Red Guru, right
Yep.
across the street. A lot of the people that worked in the mill went over there to eat their lunch.
Yeah.
Second shift would go over and get their evening meal.
I have this strong memory of getting hamburgers wrapped in wax paper from
Yes.
Red's.
Red made good hamburgers.
He did.
Oh yeah.
He did.
In fact, he was a classic in the town. And yeah, that's an. Well, yeah, a number of diners. We had another one down the street a little bit called Dewey's Diner. It was one of those like the streetcar diners.
Oh, lunch cars.
Punch cards.
Yeah.
Yeah, and there was a busy little village. You had a number of stores,
Yeah.
but it was well supported because everybody worked in a mill and then they supported the village. But your family really helped to build the village.
Yeah. Maybe I should tell you that I got involved in trying to trace family history long after everything had closed. And it was nothing we ever talked about at home. I mean, I knew so little about the company, but as I learned more and more about it, it was a lot of little villages. They built right around the mill, and you know,
With the mill housing.
with the mill housing and
But then, like, we just, we built a new fire station. But the old one down there next to Leroy's garage,
mhm,
that was built by your family.
right.
And then they put the fire trucks in there.
There wasn't a fire department really,
No,
In
not a
this
town
town.
one.
not a town one.
You're right. And then the park.
Yep.
They built the Memorial Park, the World War I monument,
Mhm.
and the little stone building up on top of the hill right next to the park.
Yeah.
That was built as the first church, because you were bringing all these French Canadians in, and they needed a place to have their Sunday service. That was built for it before they built the church up on the hill, which I'm sure that the family contributed to building as well.
I kind of suspect they did.
Yeah, quite sure.
I don't know for sure, but I am pretty confident.
And of course, the Beaumont, which is a nursing home now, was built by your great-grandfather?
No, Beaumont was
Your
built by my grandfather. His father, my great-grandfather, lived in a house at the bottom of the hill known as Wayside.
Wayside, yes, which is long gone.
Long gone. The steps are still there, I think, but
Yes, the steps are the only thing left is the
Right.
steps. Beautiful wall and the steps.
and I actually, as a kid, I was born in Detroit, but I moved to Rockdale in 1947. And I remember going to Wayside at that time, but it was Beaumont that was the home of all the family activities. And Beaumont was built up on the same property, but up at the top of the hill.
Yes.
And there was a big stable and kennel operation up in there, and open to the woods just forever beyond.
Yes, they had a big water tower up there.
Yep,
And then, of course, they had the pond at the bottom,
right.
which was for the mill.
It was. And I think probably the water tower and the pond were interrelated, that it was part of keeping the water flow going.
Yes,
'Cause-
yes, that was always a problem for the mills with the water flowing.
Blackstone was a real problem, yeah.
Yes, it put the canal out of business. in the winter it would freeze, but in the summer it would dry up.
Well, the railroad had a pretty big hand
Right,
in
well,
putting
once
it
the
out of
railroad came in,
business.
but the canal had a hard time staying alive. And even though they could compete somewhat with the railroad, they couldn't compete with the fact that they would freeze in the winter and dry up in the summer. The railroad could run all the time.
You're right. You're absolutely right.
But then I remember, you know, because your mill was there, you had the railroad station.
Hmm.
I remember, actually, I was probably 6 years old, and my mother and my aunt took my brother and I to Woonsocket on the train. We got on
Ah,
that was probably one of the last passenger trains running down there.
probably was. Yeah. It's sort of funny. The railroad followed the Blackstone River,
Yes,
which meant that the Whitin Machine Works, which was built up on the Mumford River, and all those other mills were unable to get the railroad, so they put their own railroad in.
Yes,
They
yeah.
put their own railroad in.
And that operated right up until the 70s.
Hmm.
I remember being in high school and seeing the locomotive go by with a load.
And it was I think they had one of the very first electric
Yes.
engines.
Yes, they were known worldwide for having the first electric
Right.
engine within the railroad yard.
Right. Right. And they ran the passenger traffic down to Linwood too from
Yes.
Whitensville.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
It's amazing. Like I said, I mean, the whole community was grown by what they took an agricultural community going back far enough to John Whitin,
right.
Colonel Whitin.
Colonel
right?
Whitin, Paul, the
Paul
first Whitin.
Colonel Paul Whitin.
Yeah, he was known as Colonel. He was a colonel in the Massachusetts militia.
Yeah, he actually converted us from an agricultural society
He did.
to a manufacturing society. A real important figure within the Industrial Revolution.
Yeah, I think in so many funny ways, I think his wife, Betsy Fletcher,
She was a
was
real key.
probably more important
Yes.
in the
way-
founding of the Industrial Revolution. She
Well,
was
yeah, well, she developed all the mills.
right.
And here was
Right.
a lady who couldn't vote.
That's right.
I don't know if women could even own property at that time.
I don't know. She held the stock in the company though,
Right.
and that was the key. And she kept her
But she ran her sons.
she kept her four boys in line.
Yeah.
And it's funny when I keep saying funny, it's not funny, it's interesting. When she decided that as an old woman that she needed to step back, 1864, the boys went into competition against one another.
Yes, they did.
John took the machine works, but the other boys, Paul, Charles, and James, they each got textile mills, and they're all producing the same stuff. They're producing cotton.
They're all competing
and
against
they're
one another.
competing against one another. So it's a real American story, I think.
It's amazing though. All those mills are still standing.
You're right. I think you can go up and down the valley and you can see empty mills everywhere except in the town of Northbridge.
Yeah. And one of the things that we were able to get be part of the park system, the national park system, is because Winesville looks like it did 150 years ago.
It pretty much does.
Yeah, and you can do the history. I did a tour for the Park Service a
Yeah.
couple of years ago, and you could do it right from that center.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the White Machine Works built the bank. You had a national bank and a savings bank, a national bank to handle the business
Right.
transactions for the shop, and the savings bank to help the people, give them savings accounts and
Yep.
personal banking. You had you've got the community center,
The community center, the library,
the library, the church.
the churches. I think they contributed to just about every church in
Yes.
town. But for
And
sure,
and the common.
and the common.
And then right
Yeah.
across the street, the original houses built by John Whitin to bring employees into the
Yeah.
town. They're still there.
Yep, and there are houses all over town. I mean, you can find them in Rockdale, you can find them in Whitinsville. You can, and you can see these houses were built by Charles because he had the granite cotton mill, which is now apartments there at the river.
Yes.
So the road that runs up to the name of it eludes me right now, but the road that runs up to the golf course, those houses were
Fletcher Street.
those houses were built by Charles,
Yes.
not by John. And then you can go in Whitinsville and you can find the ABC streets, and that was all John.
Oh, yeah.
And
right here in Rockdale, we have always these mill houses.
yeah,
Starting with right across from the mill, it was called the Old Village because that was the original.
Holbrook Village, I think. Yeah.
Yeah, Holbrook family originally started it.
Yeah.
A lot of those houses are gone now. They had fires and
Right.
weren't replaced.
But they're still.
But right here on Church Ave,
Yeah,
you've got a number of row houses.
you sure do.
And in fact, the house right here next to the ballpark, my in-laws bought. And my wife and I, we lived there for a few years of our marriage.
Wow.
So we built the house on property that was in my family since 1911. We're well entrenched within
You
the
are.
community.
You are. You are well entrenched.
But, you had the library in Rockdale.
Yeah.
We talked about that on the phone, how you had to come and sign a release so that they could.
Because the library, when the Whitinsville Social Library, which is a combination of town and foundation,
Yes.
couldn't maintain it any longer. They just couldn't keep it operating. By the original deed, it was going to revert to the Whitin family, and
Yeah.
so we made sure that the library got the building and was able to do whatever they wished with it.
Right. A lot of cases, the Whiten family owned a lot of the parts of Rockdale, but when
Yep.
the mill went out of business, they turned it over to the town. That was the water department,
Mm-hmm.
which still is owned by the town. It's serviced by the Winesville Water Company, but the town owns it. And now was the fire station.
Fire station. Yeah.
And the common.
Mm-hmm.
And here where we are, the field up here, where the American Legion is, that was all owned by, and there what they did is they formed a group called the Rockdale Village Foundation,
Mm-hmm.
which would oversee it. And it was originally 5 businessmen from town, were the original members, and it was up to them as time went on, if, they would get older,
Yeah.
they would put someone else on. And I ended up on it. So,
It was actually the same deal with Pine Grove Cemetery in
yes,
Whitinsville.
that was built by the Whiten family.
That was, and only just recently did it
Yes.
get turned over to the town.
Right, because they no longer could maintain it.
Right, they were the original endowment was running out.
Yes. And it's expensive. But I say, I mean, like I said, this whole village, the whole town,
Mm-hmm.
owes its existence to the Whiten family.
Yeah, I think that's
Yeah, and it's great that we have this history, we can show it.
yeah. As you know, I worked really hard to produce that movie.
Oh, but I'm glad you brought that up. Right after this show is done, 8
Yeah.
o'clock, we're gonna be playing it.
Oh, great, great.
So if you haven't seen it yet, it's a great video. Yeah, how many years did you work on that?
10 years.
10 years.
10 years. I have to give credit to Dennis Rice and what was then Alternatives, because Dennis Rice said to me one day, I got involved with Dennis after I retired from the newspaper, and Dennis Rice said, we really ought to make a movie. And I thought, oh, okay, that's a good idea. How are we going to make a movie? Does anyone know anything about how to make a movie? And but it was a project that you wouldn't believe how many hours of interviews we have. Like each one of those people in there was interviewed for at least an hour. So we've got an hour of video and we've got maybe 3 minutes, 2 minutes,
Yeah, you have to
5
edit it
minutes.
down.
And you edit it down. So we've got this treasure trove of all of these things. We were so lucky to start it while there were still people alive who lived it.
Yes,
And you know the number of those people is dropping off very fast.
yes,
And my concern in making this was that when they're all gone, their story still needs to be told. And the story is the story of the Industrial Revolution, but it's also the story of one family, the Whitin family, but the story of thousands of other families that made Whitinsville and Northbridge what it is. And if you just close your eyes and say, oh, I don't care about that old stuff, and then you open them and you look around, you have no understanding of how we got where we are.
yes,
And I think that you know, Northbridge is so vital. It's got life. It's got all kinds of stuff going for it. We're not talking about a rust bucket town. And the reason that it's so strong is those 150 years of history from changing from farm to factory. And how we got there, people need to know that.
yes, yes. Yeah, because we were totally agricultural.
Yep,
Even the center of town wasn't anywhere near Whitinsville, it was at the
Right.
top of the hill. And it was your family that actually got it moved down to where it is by building the Memorial Hall, the town hall.
Town Hall, right, where Paul Whitin, the original blacksmith, and the first Whitin, who was born as Whiting and dropped the G
Yes,
from his name, lived at the site of the town hall.
you know why he dropped the G?
There's all kinds of rumor about it.
I read where it was another Paul Whiting who was not the most creditable person, who had the same name, and he didn't
Right.
want to get associated with him.
There was what I know of that story is that there was a Paul Whiting in Sutton and a Paul Whiting in Northbridge. And Paul Whiting in Northbridge was a blacksmith and businessman and was also the town clerk at that moment. And Paul Whiting in Sutton ran a tavern.
Right,
And sometime between applying for his wedding license and getting married, Paul Whiting, who was the town clerk, so it wasn't accidental, it wasn't like somebody made a mistake.
yeah.
He changed his name from Whiting to Whitin.
All he did was drop the G.
All he did was drop the G. And I would say everywhere I go, probably 99% of the people think my name is Whitin.
I know, I hear that all the time.
Yeah.
Well, they even say Whitinsville.
Yeah.
And,
I'll tell you a really crazy story. One of the things when I retired, I decided to throw myself into this family history because I knew nothing about it. I mean, the first time I saw that 1826 mill, the red mill or the
Yes,
Whitin
it's
mill,
still there.
all those, it's still there. The first time I ever remember seeing it, I was in my late 60s.
Oh,
I didn't know it was there. So I grew up in Rockdale. I never heard of the mill. I never heard any of these stories. So I kind of threw myself into it and organized a family reunion. And I got almost 180 something people from 13 states or 14 states and one foreign country here in Whitinsville for the first time in almost a century. There was
Yeah,
a big
your
Whitin
family's all over the
reunion.
world now, aren't they?
Yeah. And so we had it here in Whitinsville, and we got the National Park Service ranger, who was then Kevin Kleiberg, who was then with the Heritage Corridor,
Yep.
to take us on a walking tour of downtown Whitinsville and the mill and all of that stuff. And so
What a great thing for your family to
yeah.
experience.
Oh, it was wonderful. It was wonderful. And out of that, because Dennis Rice hosted our reunion,
Yes.
out of that came the notion, let's make a movie.
Dennis Rice has done a great job with restoring that mill.
Oh, he's a Whitin. He has to be, really. He's worked very hard to preserve the story of Whitinsville.
Yes. Yes, and like I say, we've been honored with being part of the national park system now.
Right.
And even Worcester isn't part of it.
No,
There's a corridor, but that's
they're
separate.
part of the corridor, and
But the national park system, we're the only one.
Hopedale.
Hopedale got into it, yes.
Hopedale and Whitinsville, and then there are a
In
couple
Rhode
of
Island.
small ones in Rhode Island,
Yeah.
and then the Slater Mill itself in Rhode Island is
Right.
now part of the
Right, which is
park.
the original
Right, that
part
was
of
the
the,
first one.
first industrial. But it was the Whitin family that really brought about the Industrial Revolution, because you built the machinery here
Right,
for the whole valley. You think about it, we're going back to the early 1800s.
yep,
You didn't have good transportation.
no,
So for these mills to develop, they needed someone to make the machinery close by so they wouldn't have to ship far.
they did their first business basically just up and down the Blackstone.
Right,
A lot of Rhode Island business. Fall River was a huge textile town,
Oh,
and there's
yes.
another one. I mean, you look at Fall River, and there's empty mill after
oh
empty
my God,
mill
it's-
after
yeah,
empty mill.
there's one on top of another.
But Fall River, New Bedford, Pawtucket, Woonsocket,
Yes.
you know, that there was a lot of early business in the 1830s, 1840s, 1850s, where they were really churning out machinery that sped up this whole industrial
Oh, yeah.
revolution.
And then they were innovative on the machinery too, improving on it all the time,
Right, right.
which ended up being the largest textile machinery manufacturer in the world.
Of its kind in the world. You know, there were other companies like Draper over in Hopedale.
Yes,
Draper was building looms. Whitin was not building looms. Whitin was building spinning frames and equipment that would produce the thread that
Yeah.
would be used
On
in
the
a
looms.
loom.
yep,
And there was a big loom company up in Worcester, you know, so but there were big, Whitin was clearly the largest of its type in the world.
yes, which is part of the town's seal now, is the
Yes.
spindle, because it's what made the town was
Yeah.
that spindle.
Yeah.
And it went right up until the late 60s.
It did. The Whitin Machine Works failed for the same reason Paul Whitin failed. That you said it earlier. You know, it just you couldn't survive in New England against by then global competition.
Right. I mean, at one point they moved to the south.
They did. They tried.
Yeah,
They did, and they had a big office in the South pretty early on, but they moved some operations to the South. But
but it was leaving the South at that time too.
yes, it was.
And, you know, like you say, labor was cheap overseas. You didn't need to have the water power, you could build anywhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we went to countries where you got cheap labor
Yeah.
and, well, no regulations. So it made it a lot simpler.
Right.
And that's what happens all the time. But they did well, and even after the Whitins left, I mean, A.B. Dick came in, and they were making photocopying machines.
Well, I think the remarkable thing is that big Whitin complex, the Machine Works complex,
Yeah.
is pretty much fully occupied.
Yes, it is. And it was great. It's a lot of startup industries.
Yeah.
And that's what they need, is a place like that to be able to get started in. And that there again was great that Mr. Kovich came in and bought this and started all that up.
Mm-hmm.
And it's been well maintained. The buildings are well maintained.
Yeah.
Got a little worried back at one point when we had the fire.
Yeah, well, remember the Crown and Eagle Mill had the big fire, but
Yes.
look, it's now fully occupied.
Yes, yeah, a lot of housing now.
Yeah. Yeah. The Granite Cotton Mill is beautiful. Bill
Oh,
Giannopoulos did the Linwood Mill.
Yes. Yes, they did a beautiful job with the Linwood Mill.
Yeah.
And it's great that these are being rehabbed like that. What might happen in Rockdale, from what I understand, he wants to put apartments in.
Yeah, I have no idea what's going to happen with the Rockdale Mills.
Well, of course, when Henry Cause sold the company Cause, they moved out.
Mm-hmm.
They moved down to Connecticut. And then Polyfoam came in. And that was Henry's son. But he retired. And now they don't own the mill any longer. So
Right.
who knows what's going to happen.
I think the mill is pretty solidly built. It may have a
Oh,
little
it-
water problem, but I think it'll be there for a while.
Oh, it's been there for many years already.
Yeah.
And if you look you can
Yeah.
see where it started out as a granite mill. And that
Mhm.
granite was mined right over here.
Right here in town?
Yeah,
Wow.
right near Shiny Rocks.
Okay.
You can still see the granite mining that was done.
Yeah.
And a lot of these houses, their foundations was granite.
Granite
from
from there?
This town was loaded with, well, this town is loaded with granite, but I was telling you how your family gave it the village the name Rockdale.
Right.
And it was after the Shining Rocks.
Yeah.
Because they wanted to get rid of the name Holbrook. When they bought the mill, why we keeping the name of the person that who owns it? We bought
Right.
it from him. We want to give it a new name. And in fact, if you walk up the stairs in the mill, it says Rockdale Mill right on the stairs. I always remember that, seeing that. I did work at the
Yeah.
Cause for a while.
Ah. Okay.
In fact, I had my aunt had a badge for Rockdale Mill.
Oh, really?
And I donated it to the Slater Museum.
Oh, the one over in Webster?
Webster, yeah.
That's quite something.
Yeah,
Wow.
I donated it to him.
Yeah.
I also had some wrenches. The White Machine Works made their wrenches, their bolts, a little bit off
Right.
from the standard size. So you couldn't use the wrenches on anything but their equipment, but people still took them.
Mm.
My father worked there for, probably 40 years, and he had some.
I found one on eBay.
Here you go.
I had no idea the history of it, except that it is square in the end instead of
Yeah.
being a typical wrench. And the other thing is it's got a big Whitin stamped into it.
Yes, yeah,
It was forged with the name Whitin in it.
yes. And they only fit on their nuts and bolts. They made
Right.
everything. They made right down to the nuts and bolts. And when you bought a machine, you got the toolkit with it. Well, anyway, he had some, so I donated them to the Slater Mill, Slater Experience. And I also had a board that was had an address on it from Whitin Machine Works, being shipped, a piece of machinery being shipped to Fall River. It's imprinted on the.
I told you the Chase companies down in Fall River were big customers.
Yeah, so I don't know if they got it. I didn't see it on, I went to the mill, but I mean to the museum, but I didn't see it on display. But I figured, it's in a place where people can enjoy it and it'll be there forever.
Yeah, it's hard to figure out what to do with some of this stuff. We have something that to my mind is pretty significant because it's coming right up, is with all the talk about Whitin, I rarely talk about Fletcher, James Fletcher, his father-in-law.
Yes.
His father-in-law, James Fletcher, was a colonel in the Massachusetts militia. We have his original commission as a
wow.
colonel in 1775, appointing him as a colonel in the Massachusetts militia.
Wow.
This same year, he took, the day after the Battle of Lexington and Concord, he took 27 men from Northbridge to Dorchester Heights. You walked in those days.
Yeah,
they walked from here to Boston.
That's one hell of a trip.
To face off against the British. They never engaged in combat, I think, but he was part of that original thing. And in the old forge, I swear his ghost is there. I walked in there.
Well, he built the original, the red mill.
No, he built the forge next to it.
Oh.
Paul, his son-in-law, built the mill, the red mill. And Paul and his father-in-law were in business together as Fletcher and Whitin, or Whitin and Fletcher, I can't remember which way it was, but Paul had by then bought out all of the Fletchers and owned the forge and the water rights at the what's now the dam there.
Yes.
And that's why he built that 1826 mill. And he built it with his oldest son, Paul, and his second oldest son, John. Paul had gone to New York and was working in actually retail in New York City. And John, who was the tinkerer, decided to move to New York and join his brother. So they were both in New York, and the father said, let's give textiles another try. Let's build our own mill here. And the three of them built that mill. But James Fletcher's ghost, James Fletcher was a member of what they called the Committees on Correspondence. And there was one of these committees in every one of the 13 colonies. And they were sort of like a secret society. They were talking about revolution, talking about overthrowing the yoke of the king.
Right. Separating from the king.
Exactly. So all that stuff was happening. That building got rebuilt. It burned and got rebuilt. But that foundation, that's exactly where James Fletcher was recruiting men and talking about the need to establish the independence that we all celebrate today.
That is amazing.
And that's coming up in this coming April of 75.
Yes. 200
was its 250th
years.
So, and we've got that commission. It's a big thing on parchment-y paper.
Yeah, what a great thing to have.
And we also have a couple for Paul, who was also a colonel in the militia, but after the Revolutionary War, in the period right after the war, and was known throughout town as Colonel Whitin.
Yes.
So.
Wasn't it John Whitin that innovated in the textile industry, came up with a new concept of machinery?
He invented a, well, I guess the most important thing was Eli Whitney and the cotton gin.
Yes.
But John Whitin invented a cotton picker that pulled the raw cotton apart
So you could start weaving it.
so that you could begin to
threading it.
threading it,
Yeah,
to
turning it into
spinning it into, the old spinning wheel.
Yes.
The Whitins built spinning frames, big long things that were the equivalent of hundreds of spinning wheels and mechanized, and but it was all based on the ability to pull the raw cotton apart and begin to.
It made a big difference because when you had to do it on a spinning wheel, you could only do so much, and then you had to bring it to the loom,
Yeah.
where they would bring it and ready for the loom, tons of it.
Yep. Boxcars eventually.
Yes.
So,
It's just amazing though.
yeah.
Then, of course, when John died, that's when they wanted to name Whitensville after him, right?
No, Paul
Paul.
died in 1831, and in 1835 the town named Whitinsville for Paul.
Oh, for Paul, okay, in honor of
For Paul, in honor of Paul. And at that point, I mean, Whitin Machine Works didn't become a freestanding company until the mid-1860s. Up until then, it was all P. Whitin and Sons,
Ah,
and they owned what became the machine shop, which became known forever as the shop,
yeah,
and 6 or 7 different mills, depending on how you want to count it. But they had a mill in East Douglas. They had the mill in Linwood, the mill in Riverdale, the mill in Rockdale. They had the 2 mills, which became one in Uxbridge, North Uxbridge. Charles eventually bought a mill in Farnhamsville that was, I think it was Farnhamsville, it was part of Grafton,
yeah, Pottersville.
that was his in-laws. But, and so the big growth was let's say from 1840 to probably expansion growth of all these mills to 1870, and then the glory years were in the 1880s, 1890s, and then for a variety of reasons, a lot of the Whitin mills failed, in part because the family line died out, in part because they remained steadfast to cotton and never saw the future in synthetics.
Yeah, and other fabrics.
So, to me, it's a fascinating story.
Oh, it is, I mean, but they still, I mean, you still had family members that kept it going well, when, the
Yeah,
LaSalle's, the Swifts.
yeah. They were all, the John
Keeler.
line, John had I think 2 sons. One died in childbirth, and the other died in his early 30s, but he had no sons. So the name Whitin died out in the John line and got
Yep.
replaced by LaSalle, and then
Well, it was all daughters, right?
all daughters, and then LaSalle gave way to, there were still LaSalle's, but gave way to Swift and
Keeler.
Mason, Keeler,
Yeah.
all of those names. They were all in-laws, I guess is
Right.
what you'd call them. And the Charles line and the James Fletcher line pretty much died out. And the Paul line, from which I'm descended, is still going strong. That's where you'll find most people named Whitin right now. They're descendants, direct descendants of Paul Jr. I'm actually the first oldest male in 7 generations to not go into the textile business. 7 generations.
Wow.
My brother wasn't quite so lucky. My younger brother got dragooned in and went into business with my dad after the mill in Gilbertville failed.
Yeah. It's amazing though, I mean, but like I said, there was a tremendous amount of textile manufacturing in the Northeast, and it's all gone.
Yeah. And there was also a tremendous amount of shoe manufacturing in the Northeast, and it's gone.
Yeah.
The Northeast was the place to do it because the Northeast had steep rivers that
Yes. Fast flowing.
fast
The
flowing,
Blackstone is one of the fastest flowing rivers in the country.
and it was known as the hardest working river in the
Yeah.
country.
Yeah, because it had so many mills on it.
Yep.
But yeah, well, we've seen a lot of manufacturing. There's some coming back,
Yep.
but it's a different type of manufacturing now.
Harry, as we wind down, there's one thing I want to be sure
Yes.
to say, because I have been involved for probably 10 or 12 years now with the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor.
Yes.
And we were the second heritage area designated as an official national treasure by Congress, and that was in 1986.
I was going to say it was in the 80s.
And we have done a tremendous amount to preserve the story of the Blackstone Valley, but also to keep people focused on water quality and making sure
Yes.
that the river becomes a recreation site. We've been pushing very, very hard over the years to fulfill the congressional mandate to have a bikeway from Worcester to Providence.
Yes.
And what I want to say is that the Heritage Corridor is such an important thing for the cultural life, the recreational life, for the values of the valley, and our federal funding has been diminishing dramatically. So we just recently launched a campaign we call the Legacy Campaign. We're a registered 501c3 nonprofit.
Oh.
We are working really hard to improve the signage, because a lot of the signs were put up in the 1980s, so they need replacing. We are putting a lot of effort into trying to get Grafton, Northbridge, and Uxbridge to sign into Let's Finish the Bikeway.
Yes.
And this legacy campaign needs support. It needs support from people who can give $10 or $20 or $50. It needs support from people who could give $10,000. So I wanted to make a pitch on your show
I'm glad
because
you did,
you
yeah.
get everybody to say, please help the Heritage Corridor. It's not a federal agency. It's a nonprofit run by volunteers, staffed.
You have a
with-
website they can go to contribute?
We do. And I wish I knew exactly, but if you Google the Blackstone River Valley National Heritage Corridor, you'll get our website, and on the website, there's a legacy campaign button, so you can do an easy contribution.
I was on a committee, that we met down at the Rinwood Mill about tracing the bike path through here.
Yes,
I gave them some ideas. One of the problems we're having is the railroad,
yep,
because you can't, they don't want you on their property, obviously, and for safety reasons, and,
yeah, but the railroad owns land,
yeah,
and the railroad is key, and frankly, the railroad is now owned by the parent of parent companies
From
in
out-
Australia.
yeah,
And there's like 5 levels of different ownership before you get down to Providence and Worcester. So if somebody knows, we can't find a person to talk to at the Providence and Worcester Railroad. If somebody knows somebody somewhere who can help us get into the railroad could make this bikeway a lot easier than
Yes.
it has been. But
and there's a problem in Uxbridge with the railroad.
and we spent a couple of years trying to get easements in Uxbridge and work with the state. The state will build it, we can't build it. The state
Right.
will build it, but we need those easements. And a lot of the private property owners said, yeah, we'll give you an easement and you can run it through here. But the railroad says, no way.
Right,
And they're in the way. But there's a brand new section just opened down in Blackstone. We're about to complete the connection between Massachusetts and
Yes.
Rhode Island. Rhode Island has
Rhode
some
Island's-
gorgeous sections.
yeah, they've done a great job.
And Massachusetts is too far behind. You can start it in Worcester at the Heritage Center office in Worcester, it starts, but you get to Millbury and it stops,
Right,
and you're onto the road. And we need to get this thing finished, and getting people to help us by helping us get the resources to hire some engineers and to push this project ahead and to advocate for it is important. So
Well,
I wanted to make that pitch.
I'm glad you did, because that's one thing I would love to see happen.
You'll be able, I hope in my lifetime and your lifetime,
Yes,
to ride, maybe we'll be too old to ride, but anyway, to ride from Worcester all the way to Providence and then link up with the East Bay, go over the interstate highway and go all the way down to Bristol, Rhode Island. You'll be able to do that in a single ride.
well, isn't there a bike path when you get to Rhode Island that connects all the way along the east coast?
There's a lot of interconnectivity, but when you get to Providence, there's this beautiful one that runs down along Narragansett Bay,
Yes,
the East Bay bike path down to Bristol from India Point.
I mean, we've come a long way, okay, we're getting closer. We've come a long way, the river is a lot cleaner than it's ever been.
It is,
And the bike path is getting closer, but we really gotta make that last hump.
absolutely.
Harry, thank you for coming in, this is great.
I enjoyed it, Harry.
And right after this show, we're gonna play the video.
Super.